This episode of the Craftsman Online podcast is sponsored by Bricks Masons. From elegant Masonic rings that showcase your commitment to our craft to finely crafted regalia and apparel that honor your tradition, Bricks Masons delivers quality and craftsmanship that truly stands out. Shop now at bricksmasons.com and use promo code CRAFTSMAN, that's CRAFTSMEN, to receive free shipping with your first order.
The comments, opinions, and views shared during this program are of those individual Freemasons and do not reflect the official position of a Grand Lodge, concordant body, appendant body, Masonic Authority, or craftsmanonline.com. Welcome to the Craftsman Online podcast, the only 5-star rated Masonic podcast endorsed by the Grand Lodge of New York. And now your host, Worshipful Brother, Michael Arce.
Hey, welcome back for our episode on Secret Masonic History. It starts with finding a dusty box in your attic. Now, just imagine that. You come across it, maybe it's got some old letters, or you've done this, you found some old family photos, right? They're a little faded, but picture that attic is now your lodge, and those treasures are basically pieces of Masonic history. That's what happened to Brother Lee Justo of Huguenot Lodge number 46 in White Plains, but instead of just marveling in the history, they did something really incredible with that. And that's what we're going to be talking with him on this episode, how a weekend cleanup project led to this find on the lodge's role in the American Revolution. Brother Lee continues to research this today. He's got a very popular Secret Masonic History YouTube channel. We'll be talking about that. And also how researching Masonic history has actually enhanced his understanding of some of the deeper lessons in the Fellowcraft degree and our Masonic ritual. But first, let's bring him in here. Welcome to the Craftsman Online podcast, Brother Lee.
Brother Arce, it's good to see you again. I know we met down in D.C. I had a great trip there and made a video for it. So it was a pleasure to join and visit your lodge.
You know, it's always amazing, and we take it for granted sometimes, this world that we live in, is that I feel like when I met you in person, I was like, oh, I know you already because I had seen you thanks to your YouTube videos and some of the meetings that we've done with the Grand Lodge of New York and the committee, and we'll talk about planning the bicentennial efforts with Lafayette. But yeah, it was one of those things where I'm like, oh, and here you are in person. I wanted to talk a little bit about you, your place in your lodge, of course, Huguenot Lodge, and the fantastic history they have. But it all kind of starts with one, general question, which is what led you to become a Freemason?
Well, I actually grew up around the fraternity. I had my first experience as a young child visiting Thistle Lodge's Christmas party, which Yorktown Diamond Thistle Lodge, which I'm a member of now, along with Huguenot, still has that Christmas party. This was around 73 or so. My father became a Mason in 74. I joined the DeMolay in 1980. And then when I was a little bit older, I had absolutely no interest in joining Freemasonry because it was basically, my father's old friends I didn't want to hang out with. When I reached my 30s, unfortunately, my father had passed, but I really got interested in Freemasonry and started reading quite a bit about it.
I find that so interesting when I talk to DeMolay boys that become Masons or choose not to. And we could have a whole separate conversation and podcast episode on that. But they either go right into the craft or they never step foot into the lodge. But it's so interesting with DeMolay being part of the Masonic family. It's a youth group for young men. I'm guessing that your work with DeMolay, your family connection to Freemasonry, is that how you got interested in Masonic history?
I'm sure that played a part in it because not only was my father a Mason, my grandfather was, and my great-grandfather was. So I'm sure that played a role into it and got me interested in some of the history. I think I've always been a history buff, though. I mean, it's always been an area of fascination to me.
I love the stories in history. They're so fascinating. It was always my favorite class or subject. In high school, I was kind of sad when I got to college. I only got to take one, course in it. Would have loved to have been a history major. And honestly, history was one of the things that drove me to relocate to DC or the DC area because I wanted to submerge myself. I mean, there's nowhere else, I think, in the world except maybe New York City where you could find so much history and Masonic history. And that's what I find so interesting about your story. I have to ask, I'm sure you've been asked this question 1,000 times. Is it true that everything that we know about the sensational YouTube secret history channel that you've created started with a cleanup project at your lodge one weekend?
It most certainly did. We were cleaning out our storage, and we came across these very old books, and we started looking through them, wondering what they were. We noticed some names in there of brothers. Their last names were the same names as many streets in our area. And that really got us digging. And one of them was like, hey, what if George Washington visited our lodge? Well, he never did, but we do have a connection to Marquis de Lafayette, which I found recently, which is pretty cool.
And he visited Huguenot Lodge?
No, we talked about his bicentennial and his return. When he came here in 1824, he was greeted by two men, Gideon Coggeshall and Laird Butler. Now, Gideon was our first master as a lodge, and Laird Butler was the master of the lodge when he came to visit. And apparently when Lafayette would come to a state, it would be the Grand Master of that state who would be the first person to greet him. And when he came to a local municipality, it would be the master of the local lodge, if available, to greet him.
This is what I find so interesting, the way that you talk about these names. And I feel like I'm guilty of this. I'm sure if there's other brothers that are listening to this particular episode, maybe they have as well, where maybe the extent of the research into the history of your lodge is going and getting the membership book, the rolls that everybody gets to sign once you become a Master Mason. And, there's that one name that, nobody touches, that line, because, that was somebody famous either in our community or in our state, or everybody in America would know who this name is that just happened to be a member of our lodge. And that's really the only one that catches your eye. There's so many other men's names that are listed on these pages. And maybe if you have a family affiliation, you recognize it. But I just love the way you talk about the names and the people who were key figures of your lodge. When you were going through this kind of weekend cleanup project and you found these photos and these books and these artifacts, what was the energy like? What was the response like from the other brothers? Were they like, oh, this is interesting? Or did you stop everything and immediately start going into Indiana Jones mode?
I'm a bit of a history geek, and the other brothers in my lodge, most of them are not. So I felt that it was getting to the point where I was finding all this information out, and I kept texting them. We have this WhatsApp group. And I'm like, you know what? Why don't I just make videos out of this? Because I don't want to just keep peppering them with this information. And then at the same time, I thought, well, you know what? Maybe we'd help get some recognition for our lodge. It's not uncommon that a lodge needs to grow. We certainly do. So I thought maybe that would help. And one thing that has always frustrated me about Masonic history, when you read it, it's usually about the lodge, where they were located, what kind of things they did. It's never about the brothers. And, I started looking at these names, and my first thought was, did any of these guys fight in the American Revolution? Because I kind of had that History Channel view of the American Revolution, that the American Freemasons were behind it. Doing this project completely shifted my mind and made me realize that there were very active Masonic brothers on both sides of the conflict, and they both felt in a way that they were fighting for freedom. So it really led to me understanding much more the loyalist side. So it really was a great learning process for me.
You're obviously the historian of your lodge, and if you weren't, I think that would be a shame. I'd love to know who was more into history of your lodge if you were not sitting in that chair. But with the work that you've done, do you feel that when the members of your lodge, your brethren, talk about the history or the story of Huguenot Lodge, do you feel that they have more to share than just kind of the standard, like, oh yeah, we're one of the oldest lodges, or we were here during the American Revolution, or whatever the standard fare is?
It's really created a buzz in the lodge. The lodge was kind of like post-COVID, kind of still depressed. Like, well, what was us? Really, nothing's going on. And this whole project's really kind of energized the lodge to some extent. I'm happy to see it. The other brothers have told me that. So, it's great to hear, because, I put a lot of time and effort into making the videos.
I do agree with you. I think a lot of the time when we talk about the history of lodges, it's usually about the building. or the lodge as the group of the brethren. Like, for example, my home lodge in Troy, the building that they actually meet in, the Troy Masonic Hall, was one of the homes back in the time that was used during the Underground Railroad. What they have done over the years is they've sealed those secret passages that led to the river. But when it comes to famous members of that lodge, when I shared the story of, oh, well, when you pull out the rolls and you point, and there's always that name. Well, in Troy, and it's just probably a name that just people in that area will recognize, as Russell Sage, the Sage College, and was part of, his legacy afterwards. And he was one of the founding members of our lodge. And I think it's exciting when a brother is able to make a connection to a figure or a time or thing in history that relates to Freemasonry and to their lodge, because it usually brings you back to the community. And now you're actually learning about the place from whence you came, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I think it's so important for lodges to look at their history and look at it in this way. Who were the brothers that founded your lodge? Did you have any famous brothers through the years? I mean, one of our brothers was Colonel Henry Steele Olcott. He was a colonel in the American Civil War on the Union side. He became famous later on in life because he co-founded the Theosophical Society with Madame Blavatsky. But he was also on the investigative committee for the Lincoln assassination. The guy led an absolutely fascinating life. Haven't covered him in the videos yet because I'm still kind of stuck in the American Revolutionary War era, but you just never know who you're going to find. And we actually have the meeting minutes from when he sat as secretary. I mean, with him filling them out. So it's just great, cool stuff that you can find in your lodge.
And that's another thing that I feel often gets overlooked. So many lodges, thanks to modern technology, have digitized those minutes, so they're able to easily go back with the secretary and maybe a hard drive and go, oh, you want to see the minutes from 1823? We have that right here. Bang, here's what took place. Here's who was present. And it shows you, like, who was active, who was actually going to meetings, a little bit of like what they talked about. Lodge minutes were recorded a little bit differently then as they are now. But to me, it was one of those things where I'm like, you know what, I better start making sure I have better attendance at lodge and that I'm participating in the lodge. Because who knows 100 years from now, who's going to be looking to see what my name was doing sitting in those meetings.
Absolutely. And always try and sign a guest book if you visit a lodge.
Yes. Yeah.
I went upstate and I filmed quite a bit because one of the members of our lodge was Oliver Delancey. He was our second master, and he was pretty much related to almost every loyalist going during the Revolution. His uncle was the highest ranking. He was a major general for the British. He was the highest ranking officer serving on the British side who had been born here. His other uncle was judge during the Peter Zenger trial a few decades before that. And then he was related to Sir John Johnson. Now, Sir John Johnson was a key figure up in upstate New York. I see you shaking your head, so you know this. He was actually married to Mary Nicole Watts. Now, Mary Nicole Watts was the sister of John Watts Jr., who was also in our lodge. And if you've ever visited Trinity Church, Wall Street, as you're walking in, to the left, you'll see this giant statue of John Watts Jr. So these guys were fighting against brothers from St. Patrick's Lodge, which Sir John Johnson's father had founded along with John Butler. John Butler and Sir William Johnson were raised in Union Lodge in Albany, as was Peter Gainsford, who fought against them at the siege of Fort Stanwix. And in St. Patrick's Lodge, there was Captain James Gregg, who served in the fort during the battle, as well as Nicholas Herkimer, who lost his life at the Battle of Oriskany. So this was Lodge Brother against Lodge Brother. I mean, it completely destroys the whole narrative that we're some secret society that fostered the American Revolution. And a lot of people equate us with the Sons of Liberty. These were two distinct groups. John Johnson was actually the last provincial Grand Master of New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. So he was pretty much the head guy in the state. So, you know, it just completely destroys that whole narrative and conspiracy theory. And I think people find that threatening, even if you're like very much a patriotic American, to think that some secret group organized this violent overthrow of a government and they're still around. Who knows what next they'll do? You know, I think that's still alive today, and it's just it's nonsense.
In the American Revolution was such a tricky and difficult era, because it was brought to light in a discussion I sat in here at one of the lodges in DC, and they talked about how there were still loyalists. And so there was almost like the first civil war that was actually taking place, where you had this group that wanted their independence from England, but then you had some Americans that were really kind of happy with the way things were going and wanted to continue to support the British. So even at that point, when you think about what was happening and the maneuvering and kind of the cat and mouse game that Washington and the Americans had to do to beat this bigger force, like that story alone, I can see why you're still in the American Revolution, because that is a fantastic story.
Oh, it's such a complex time. There's so many different reasons why people were fighting in the American Revolution. And the loyalists, you have to understand, like the Huguenots or Huguenots were the perfect example. This was a group of French Protestants. They were Calvinists, and they had to flee France because they were being persecuted at the time. And England opened up their doors, the British Empire, and they welcomed them and they gave them religious freedom. So a lot of loyalists, were on that side, and they believed that they were fighting to preserve the freedom. And they feared exactly what happened in the French Revolution, where it became, violent anarchy. And we spoke about General Lafayette. He was also heavily involved in the French Revolution, but he detested they were called Jacobites. Those were the people who were responsible for all the guillotining and the chaos. And he actually fled France to get away from that.
The Craftsman Online podcast is now sponsored by BricksMasons.com, our favorite destination for all of our Masonic shopping needs. Whether it's apparel for yourself or a cool gift idea for another brother, make BricksMasons.com your online marketplace where tradition meets innovation. Take a look at BricksMasons' new Masonic briefcase made of premium, genuine cow leather. This versatile bag seamlessly transforms from a traditional briefcase to a convenient shoulder bag or backpack within minutes, offering an unparalleled versatility for your needs and ensuring comfort and convenience when you most need it on the go. It also comes with ample space for your laptop, documents, and essentials. Plus, you can get your favorite Masonic symbol or personalize it with your name and lodge number for free. Visit BricksMasons.com and explore their extensive catalog. Elevate your Masonic experience with style and substance. Plus, Craftsman Online podcast listeners use promo code CRAFTSMAN, that's CRAFTSMEN, at checkout to enjoy free shipping with your first order. Hey, it's Worshipful Brother Michael Arce. This summer, you can join Freemasons around the country in celebrating the bicentennial anniversary of Brother Marquis de Lafayette's final goodwill tour of the United States. Visit us online at craftsmanonline.com to view our extensive Lafayette bicentennial calendar. Now, this is featuring some really cool parades, Masonic events like history talks with Masonic historian and author and friend of the Craftsman Online podcast, Brother Chris Rulli, also the New York Grand Lodge Lafayette Gala, the Lafayette French degree that will be taking place in the city, and so much more. Plus, at craftsmanonline.com, you can share your lodge's celebration or event and add it to our calendar. See what's happening this summer as we roll out the red carpet for the celebration of Lafayette's bicentennial, and add your event at craftsmanonline.com. I've always told people that if you have an interest in Freemasonry, kind of like one of the unnecessary qualifications, let's call it, I believe you kind of have to be a little bit of a history nerd. Otherwise, you're just really not going to get it. Whether it's, ancient history of the world or civilizations or American history, which you're going to learn a lot of through the storytelling that happens in our lodge stories. So for me, when I was coming in, the movie National Treasures had been out. You hear about Freemasonry and that, but that's not what led me to join a lodge. But that's what I kind of thought I was going to expect when I got into my mother lodge, was that I was going to hear all these stories, as you said, how the Masons were involved with the American Revolution and and there really wasn't that. There was a cool story that my mother lodge has about the Civil War, the day that the war stopped, that they share and we talk about. But outside of that, there wasn't very much. Do you kind of feel that not necessarily it's the role of the historian of the lodge, but do you feel that it's kind of the duty of the brethren to find that significant story? It doesn't have to be anything, fantastic. It can just be something very simple that can just be shared with visitors that come to your lodge about what makes your lodge and Masonry unique.
Well, I found through the years there are various types of brothers, and everyone has their own interest. Some men just join it because they want to do charity. Some just join it because they want the friendship and brotherhood. And then you have, extreme history buffs who join and they really get into it. And then there are also who join it just because of the philosophy and all the esoteric kind of stuff. I have interest in all those things. I love the brotherhood. I love hanging out with the guys. I love understanding more about the ritual and what its meaning was. And this project actually helped me on that end, because one of the things I started researching was the cause of the American Revolution. And one of those things was natural law, John Locke. And then you start understanding that, Masonic philosophy is tied into that natural law. My perspective on Freemasonry has changed so much that I think that we say that we're here to make good men better. I think there's a reason behind that. We're trying to make good men better to make society better, because the more good men we make better, the better society will be. Now, according to natural law, it just basically comes down to complete objective morality. Do no harm unto others. The more that society moves toward that, where people are harming others less, the freer and more prosperous we become as a society. So I now believe that it's Freemasonry's duty to build. I mean, through the years, authoritarians have tried to divide and conquer. And now I see Freemasonry as a body to unite and build and prosper.
It's interesting you say that it was the ritual that kind of led you into searching history, which I had that similar connection as well. I was doing a presentation for a lodge on at least in New York, the 4 necessary requirements to becoming a Freemason. And we know that one of them is being the term freeborn and like what that really means. And by the way, it has nothing to do with quote unquote slavery. That's not it. It led me into the journey of learning about, when you said John Locke, I actually was reading works from John Lilburn, who came up with the concept of freeborn. And then they also, inspired the whole pursuit of happiness that you'll recognize those words that Thomas Jefferson used, thanks to Mason, as they were, putting together the Declaration of Independence and the beautiful flowing words that came from that. And it all kind of came back to just one word in our Masonic ritual. And this was like a 3-month project, and it was so satisfying. And it was one of those things where, as you're talking about it, and I'm like, yeah, I think sometimes brothers look at the history of the lodge as it was back in 1821 that this brother did this thing, and at this time, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that. Sometimes the story of history and Freemasonry goes back to maybe men that weren't Masons, but where Masons that wrote our ritual were inspired, and what led them to put these words on paper that now we're learning and memorizing and repeating every time we have a meeting.
This project has led to a fascination with the second degree for me. And that was a degree I kind of skipped over. I mean, I went through it, but I was like, what? But now there's so much in that degree that people just miss. And it ties directly into the history of our lodge. Within that degree is the trivium and the quadrivium. We know it better as grammar, rhetoric, and logic, which the proper order of that is grammar, logic, and rhetoric. And then the quadrivium is arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. And those 7 together make the 7 liberal arts and sciences. And at the core of Freemasonry is the pursuit of truth and knowledge. Our founding brothers founded probably the first public library in Westchester and the Bronx. They had hundreds of books, and they had 2 branches. And you could take out a book for a reasonable fee and return it whenever. And we actually this is one of the things we found. We have the registers from that library. Who took out what book it was. And then 3 of our brothers were noted in history books for being very valuable to public education. One of them was actually Brother Dr. Matson Smith. He was actually Master of the Lodge multiple times. but he was very instrumental in New York State and founding public education. So you look at the second degree, and they're talking about education, and you're not, it's a classical education, meaning that you're not rote memorizing facts, figures, numbers. You're actually processing the information and analyzing it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I feel like the fellowcraft degree is kind of overlooked because there's so much significance in the entered apprentice degree. The lodge gets excited. Hey, we just obligated a new brother.
Right. Yeah. And then there's the celebration of the third degree because now you're a full brother, right?
Yeah. And it's like, how quickly can we get you to become a master mason? Because sadly, in most situations, because we have an empty chair and we need a brother that can fill that chair.
Yeah, exactly. You know the drill. So, just touching back on the quadrivium and the trivium. Now, this was the way the Roman Empire educated all like the senators and all like the upper class people. The slaves were forbidden to learn this, and apparently Caesar himself threatened the execution of a captain in the Roman army because he was teaching one of the slaves the trivium and quadrivium. And Caesar apparently said if they learn this, our method of thinking, they wouldn't want to be slaves anymore. In a letter to James Warren, Sam Adams kind of echoed this. And he said, if virtue and knowledge are diffused among the people, they will never be enslaved. This will be their greatest security. So this was part of the American Revolution, and it made me so proud to see that our brothers championed this kind of education after the war.
I love having a Masonic history discussion with an actual lodge historian. I know that probably sounds silly, but I really, really have enjoyed this conversation. You have no idea, because I love hearing about these stories. I love hearing, it's not just these stories, but they're like our stories. And I'm so thankful that there's brothers like you that are dedicated to wanting to do this, that this is your passion, that you enjoy sharing this as much as you enjoy learning it yourself.
I have to say, I recently listened to one of your episodes on pirates and Freemasonry, and I love the discussion. He mentioned the penalties. And one thing that people forget, and we have been slammed for our penalties, is the Regis manuscript, or the old charges, was 1390. The world was very different in 1390. It was run by royals who, by decree, could execute you if they found you disagreeing with us. So there was a good reason why those penalties were put in place, and people forget it. And now it's just tradition for us for the most part.
Yeah, and I think it was an interesting perspective. That was one of our early episodes, actually.
It was, yeah. Great episode.
Brother Andrew, there's a lot of romance that goes into the idea of Freemasonry, and I don't want to, it becomes a divisive issue, I think, with some members of the craft, like the role of the Knights Templar, or maybe the relationship, is probably a better, fair way to put it, of the Knights Templar and possibly, Freemasonry as a craft, and like the influence. Definitely feel like it was influenced. I think they're always trying to find that one concrete piece of evidence that says, yes, the Knights Templar were involved with Freemasonry. Do you feel that that's kind of a fair statement?
I've been since being in DeMolay, I've been obsessed with the Knights Templar. So
asking the right guy on this one.
I traveled to Roslyn Chapel in 2002, long before that movie came out.
Okay.
The Regis manuscript was 1390. It wasn't that much longer after the Knights Templar when you think about it, and there's certainly circumstantial evidence of connections, like the Sinclair family, and the first known master mason in Scotland was from the Sinclair family, and they had connections to the Templars. So there's some circumstantial evidence. I don't want to get into debate in it because I know there are people who fall on both sides. It's one of those things where you just have to believe what you want to believe.
And that's what I loved about Andrew's episode, where he kind of gave like this maybe other alternate thing that could have happened, and how the Templars could have evolved to become what we would know as like pirates today, but they weren't like the army matey, but the pirates because they had to fly under a flag, because a black flag, because they didn't have allegiance to the country and the king that they would have been allied to or sworn to protect. That was broken. So now they're basically on the run. It was just really interesting when he was kind of laying that out, and how over time that could have led to the pirates that we got to see in the Hollywood drama movies, and the stories evolve. And that's, I guess it probably, as a historian, it's one of the things where you're like, that's really not how it happened in the movies, but it was really neat, but that's really not how it went down.
Well, speaking of pirates, one of the things that has fascinated me recently is that they discovered the Witta. I don't know if you know this, but Black Sam Bellamy's shipwrecked off of the Cape Cod, and they pulled up a lot of artifacts from this wreck, and some of them had square and compass and Masonic symbols on it. It got me thinking: were they involved in Freemasonry, or were these, was this booty that they stole from a ship? Like, who knows?
Right. Right. Well, and the other thing, just getting back to like just a general love and passion of history. So I talked about like National Treasures was kind of the thing that I expected the story to be like when I went into a lodge, that, just be these older guys with, a drink in their hands, sitting around the bar, maybe a cigar, and, telling these stories. Not the case.
No, definitely not.
But I still have an interest in history, so I've really been kind of consumed lately with the new FX series Shogun. I love that, and that's more about Japanese history and the Portuguese, and it's one of those things where I will watch a program like that, and I can't help but through the lens of a Freemason think like, what was going on in the world at this time, and what would have been going on in Freemasonry at that time, and try to look for like maybe little Masonic Easter eggs that could be spread somewhere.
Absolutely. Like, you can't analyze the American Revolution without looking back in history and like leading up to then, like the golden age of piracy. I mean, this is some of the same things that led to that also led to the American Revolution. It's only a 40-year difference,
Wow. So we had kind of teased about it, and I did want to talk about this. Not only are you the historian of Huguenot Lodge number 46 in Westchester County, you're a video producer, you're a father, a very busy man, but you're also part of our team here with Craftsman Online that is coordinating the schedule events with the Grand Lodge of New York for the bicentennial of celebrating Lafayette, which is happening throughout this year. How did you get involved in this, Lee? And is there anything that you're kind of looking forward to as we get ready to roll out the red carpet for visiting brethren and those with an interest in American history?
Well, Right Worshipful Deputy Grand Master Steve Rubin knew my interest in history. He had me working on another project for the state where we're identifying historic sites throughout the state that are related to Masonry. And he asked me to get involved in the Lafayette project. And I've learned that you can't do everything. So I said, that would be great. I'll still help out, but I can't lead this other project. So I was so excited to get involved in this Lafayette thing, because I've been so buried in the American Revolution. I've talked about Lafayette multiple times, because he's probably the most important Mason in American history. And his return was definitely the most important Masonic event in our history. We're having events starting in August in New York. August 18th is going to be Lafayette Day in Westchester County. And my lodge is involved in that because one of the stops he made was at St. Paul's National Historic Site. And that is also where Gideon Coggeshall is buried. Lafayette stopped there to pay tribute to the grave of Philip Pell, who was a hero in the American Revolution. He was the last person in the Continental Congress. He basically blew out the candle and closed Continental Congress. So Lafayette stopped there to pay respects. Now, Philip Pell and Gideon Coggeshall were on the vestry of that church together, and they're buried like within 4 feet of each other. So our lodge is going there. We're going to lay a wreath at Gideon's grave, and we're also probably going to lay one at Philip Pell, because he wasn't in our lodge, but he had relatives that were in our lodge. So we feel a connection to that. And then also in New York City, the Canyon of Heroes, which is actually named for Lafayette, there's going to be a parade sponsored by the American Friends of Lafayette. And if you have not joined that, American Friends of Lafayette, you should if you're interested in Masonic history. They've been so supportive of us. They're doing God's work in getting this whole Lafayette bicentennial off the ground across the whole country. If you're a history buff, if you're involved in your lodge, get your lodge to do something for Lafayette. I mean, it was a big thing. There's a great book. It's called Guest of a Nation, and it's about his visit. Get that. Read, see if he visited your local lodge.
Absolutely. Every lodge should be doing something in their community or the area around the bicentennial celebration. If you're looking to jump on board and share with what your lodge is doing, come join us. craftsmanonline.com. You will find our official bicentennial celebration for Lafayette page on the website, and a place where you can share like what's special, what's going on in your area, or how your lodge is going to be celebrating through next year. I'd like to thank our guest this week, Brother Lee Justo from Huguenot Lodge, for joining us on the Craftsman Online podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow us on Spotify or hit the subscribe button on Apple Podcasts so you can get new episodes ready for download every Monday morning. Until next time, let peace and harmony prevail.